Hey, everybody, and Happy New Year from the team here at the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. Brooke, can you believe it? It's actually a pretty cool new year. Everybody should see very clearly this year, 2020, right?
Yep, 2020, vision
So
all the way.
this is the year of vision. So hopefully you're listening to the show over and over again, sharing it with friends, and seeing more clearly than ever. And let this be the best year you've ever had in applying these techniques, the most peaceful year internally, which seems to me, Brooke, from you and all the teachers I listen to, that somehow if you get your inner peace rocking, it tends to change either the world around you or just your experience of it. And peace happens around you too.
Either way it happens, you have a different experience and it's kind of settled. At least you learn how to navigate it better, and that creates a better experience for everybody across the board.
So we're going to start a trilogy, which I'm sure has become more popular than Star Wars. It has to be. It's Brook and Charlie. Come on now, with some special guests here and there. But this is the first part of the trilogy, right? We're going to talk about the development and expression. So what do you mean by that?
So we're talking about stories, and
Okay.
This trilogy is about how we develop stories today, how they come about, and how they begin to express in our world. And then we'll trip through part 2 next week that takes a look at our story and how we get there and how they get developed and that process. And then the week after that, we'll be talking about the third part of the trilogy, which will be about their story and how we interact with that.
And you know me, I love this topic because it's one of the areas where we get control. We can look inside of our lives or our experience and say, what's our part in it, right? Because changing other people is impossible, probably. And when you say stories, it doesn't mean reading a bedtime story to your kids. It's not talking about, spoken word. This is our interpretation of events or the stories we're telling ourselves or choosing to believe or were handed to us from experience or childhood or trauma, whatever it is. It's some set of beliefs, right? Which usually includes some sort of dualistic thinking, right and wrong, shoulds and shouldn'ts. It's the story we're repeating over and over again, whether on purpose or unconsciously, right?
Right. And, we had a conversation with Eric and Tony last week about parts. And this is a little bit of a parts conversation again. We've got a theme going here. I think it's important to just keep bringing that forward, because these stories, they originate in another space and another time. They're usually childhood related. They're where our beliefs come forward. And we've had a couple of podcasts where we've really talked about that. And in these other spaces, in these other times, these parts develop a defensive mechanism. They develop a story by which they can orient to the world. And most of the time, those stories, those defenses, those developed components of part are inaccurate. They don't have to do with what's really happening in the moment. And they have a tendency to, with these different parts, be hiding a current reality. There's an overlay, there's a veil, if you will, over what's really taking place. And what we want to do is really kind of roll back and start to slow down the process and start to look at how these parts are system managers. They are putting things in place that we can start to orient to the world in a distorted manner. But they are managing our little ones, our parts, into being able to cope with whatever happened in that other space and time.
So are they is it our soul's way or our way of dealing with something, but not the best way possibly, but it's one of the ways we sort of survive and tolerate things?
It's the way we did that when we were in that space and time. There was that development of that belief system, that development of how that particular thing came to be, and how that little one or that part tried to fix it, tried to have something that they could handle that situation from. And it may have been an aggressive piece, it may have been a hiding piece. It's where this exile or that part goes into hiding, and there's another piece that comes in to protect that.
Yeah.
And that protection piece, that part that is trying to take care of that, is hiding our reality in real time from that person or that part, so it doesn't go into overwhelm, so it doesn't explode.
So not surprisingly, childhood is on the list because it's just formative, right?
Right.
Trauma, things like that. Where do you want to begin?
Well, the trauma is the experience of that part, and it will begin to create the story that often takes us into our dualistic thinking.
Mm-hmm.
This, that, you, me, good, bad, and it starts to express around that belief. And when that belief starts to express in that distorted manner that's created in this system, we get into trouble. And the reason we're having this conversation in a three-part system is to be able to break those experiences down, to be able to take a look at how we are connecting distorted dots, how we try to put something into a story that doesn't necessarily fit. But when we can see how those dots are disconnected or connected in a wrong sequencing, then we can start to recreate. We can start to come into the here and the now. And this is all about just experiencing that particular system.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. What are your in the world of trauma? What are your thoughts on something happens that is traumatic, and then it's over, right?
Right. So let's look at your story. Let's look at my story, and a little bit about what Tony's story was last week when we were in this.
Yeah.
We come from disconnected families. We come from a place where one of our parents disappeared. We come from a place of a tragedy for a little one losing a primary caregiver.
Right.
And that creates an impact for that child. So they start to wonder who's going to leave, if I'm going to be alone, and maybe coping mechanisms for doing it by yourself in a place where you don't have those coping mechanisms in that place and time. So these other parts come in and try to regulate the system so they can cope in that moment. Mm-hmm. So you lost a father. He left, moved away. Mm-hmm. And what may happen with you from that component is, I don't want to lose my son. I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to do this. And that is a great purpose for you. But how you go about that and how you project maybe what your mother did or what she didn't do or what your dad do or what he didn't do brings in a different story as to how you create how you want to do this. And mm-hmm. It's not always the best path. It's not always the greatest strategy that these parts create, because we're not looking at it from the here and now and what's taking place. We're looking at it from the then and there and how it gets projected into what's happening. Mm-hmm. And that's a trauma. That's an experience of that part, that child, that little one that is trying to recreate the situation to overcome it in real time. And that, from what we understand in the psychological community, doesn't really work. It's not an effective strategy. So when we can start to, unblend from these components and start to see it from a different place, and taking the time to be able to look at it from a piece and parts component, then we can start to reorganize.
They're like trauma filters or trauma lenses. You're looking at the reality around you through a certain experience that may have only happened once or that happened decades ago.
Right. And those lenses are the way that we see the world, that the belief systems that we've created function from. And, as we've talked about belief systems, these are the things that we're trying to challenge.
Belief systems are weird because you can pick almost any belief system and go out into the world and find evidence for it and keep it supported. People are good, people are bad, the world is good, it's dangerous, no one's trustworthy, there are great people. Whatever you sort of start with, you can kind of go out, and so you might as well pick a belief system that's edifying and uplifting and peaceful.
If we can, but we have to be able to unblend from that belief system that is presenting itself. And this is that expression of that story that was created in another space and another time. And when we start to see the story, that part is coming forward. That part is expressing its belief as it sees it. And the manager parts, the protector parts, these other pieces that are involved in that are projecting their story into it. So it's not, there's this hidden story that one part has, and then there's this other story that this other part is maybe overlaying on that to protect that piece from going into overwhelm. And these are the dots that we're trying to connect from not being present. So the idea here is, and we'll discuss this a little bit more, is to understand that each one of these parts has a story that it's trying to tell us. And that there's a distortion created from each one of these parts that needs to be heard, it needs to be seen, it needs to be listened to. And that there is a break in that story from the current time of what's really going on. So the idea in all of this is how do we slow everything down and unblend from that, to be able to come into the present self, to be able to look around and orient, and then be able to take that next step of listening to the story, listening to that part, listening to what it has to tell us from an observer standpoint, from a place of self. And then be able to come back into that moment of letting these pieces that are lost in another space, another time, that are kind of running the bus from the back seat, to go, oh, there's somebody else here. And this doesn't just happen in a moment. These are things that we have to keep going over and over and over, and making a practice of listening to those. So these parts that are lost in time begin to trust that we are here to take care of the business. And that's where the activation starts to drop down. That's where we start to be able to have a little more coherency in our observation of what's here right now.
Yeah.
And then to be able to retell the story from here and now.
Right. Do you have an example either from your own life or from someone that you've seen work on a story in their life, or sort of collaborate the parts, What progress, what's an example of making progress in this area that you can share?
Well, my own story. You know, I had an incredibly dysfunctional childhood. My parents, for all intents and purposes, were not there. They were not engaged. I was not a priority in their world. And as a result of that, I had to learn how to um, function
Hmm.
by myself without any real um, groundwork in there. And what happens in that is we start to look at, or I started to look at, um, well, there's only me. And if there's only me, I have to take care of me first because that's my survival.
Okay.
And I didn't have an orientation to other as support. And I didn't have a sense that other was out there to support me. So as I entered into my early relationships, the idea is, well, you're here, but I don't really trust that you're here. I don't trust that you're here to support me. So the orientation was I continue to support myself from a much more narcissistic component, a much more self-centered spot.
Hmm.
And when somebody would come in and do something that triggered that sense of I'm alone, I have to do this myself, I would go into some form of um, compensating.
Hmm.
So as I developed and I started to actually look around and see that I was here, that I was able to actually be there and to take care of these pieces, and I began to create more friendships, more support in my world, then I could see that, yeah, there's people here. And if I leaned into that, if I trusted that, and if I supported them in a relational manner, then things started to change. And then I could look at the world from, oh, I've created something where I am stable, where I am here, and I'm taking care of that little one and changing the reality of current time.
Right.
So as I began to do that, and as I continue to do that, my relationships become stronger. I become less activated. There's more trust in the system. I'm able to not disappear. And when I feel myself disappear, I can come back and go, oh, this little one's back here talking. I need to go back and have that conversation. I need to settle that piece.
Hmm.
So that's an overview or an example of how that piece has worked for me.
Yeah.
But also from that, what I could see or what I began to develop is this ability to see how the stories in real time um, began to affect my activation and how I started to develop those stories that created the conflict or had the potential for creating conflict, and then to start to reel those back and to be able to work this back and forth. So it's a process where, as the listeners are listening to this, this isn't something that we can typically do on our own. We need somebody to help us through the process. We need a coach, we need a therapist, we need somebody that understands this process, that can help us develop the practices of working with this. It doesn't just come and go, okay, I got this, I got a part, I do this. No, it's something that we develop over time. But what we're trying to do, hell, Charlie, we've been doing these podcasts for 15, 16 months now, 17 months, and they keep developing. People are listening to these and they're getting some hints about this stuff. When we are in conflict, this is what we need to start to work with to develop so we can step out of it. All of this is activation. All of this is an attempt to make sense of the world from a place where there's no sense. I mean, we're working with people that have cognitive distortions, and some of them are severe. But when we start to look at ourselves from this perspective, we get to see that we have cognitive distortions.
Yeah.
And the difference, hopefully, is that we've got an intention to be in relationship with our cognitive distortion, where they may or may not, or they may or may not have the capacity to.
Yeah.
But this is really the trail. This is the pathway to relationship with ourselves and with the people in our world. These are truly the places where our relationships get lost.
Right.
Yeah.
Something, sorry to cut you off, something near and dear to my heart, and you can tell me your thoughts on this, is like past traumas are pretty easy to look at, like something really painful happened. To be candid, I think even my experience with court has been a trauma, but I set that up, not on purpose. And that's kind of what's on my mind right now, is with having a belief or a should and shouldn't about how you think something in the future is going to go or should go, like sort of expectations, I guess is what I'm talking about, right? If you paint a story of how you think, quote, it should be, this breakup process or the court itself or your ex or whatever, even your kids, you're not happy with how they're progressing through it, you're kind of setting yourself up for more trauma. So there's past traumas, right? And then there's stories that you can tell yourself that sort of set you up for disappointment or more experiencing more trauma, because it's not possible for things to go exactly how you think they're going to go.
Right. Well, trauma comes in and, things happen, whether it's a car accident or a divorce or a lost job or a change in business or whatever those pieces, they're this impact point.
Mm-hmm.
But so much of how we react to those, so much of how we deal with those are based on our earlier beliefs, on these places of how we see the world from that other space and time. So again, when we can be in relationship with that, we can go, oh, this is what's happening right now. How do I need to solve this problem? Because frankly, I'm more present. I've got my parts and I'm in conversations with them. I can hear what they're trying to tell me here, but this is what's going on. And as we develop this conversation through the next couple of weeks, we're going to see how that story comes in and how the other person's story comes in to that complex. And as we understand how this stuff was developed, then we can start to regulate the expression.
Mm. And there is, I see from the notes, there is a way to unblend these stories, right?
Well, the unblending comes from having the internal conversation. The unblending is I can feel that all of this stuff is going on in here and I'm having a reaction to it. And then I can say, okay, here's this part. What's it want to tell me? And can I ask it to tone down? Can I come back to it? And then I can start to unblend and see it from a place of here and now, a place of stability, a place of having a different story of what the world really looks like. And then that conversation can help us retell our story in real time, what it is that, and I think the storytelling in real time is often the problem-solving component of, oh, this is what's here. Oh, this is what needs to be done. This is how I can move forward and settle the nervous system. Because when we have a plan, when we have agency, when we have settlement internally, then the solutions come much easier.
There was a time in my life I did a lot of research on small groups, small therapeutic groups, home groups, and things like that. Mm-hmm. And as you're talking about the different parts, like a small group or a home group that doesn't have any leader can be a little bit chaotic. A small group that has a leader but everybody talks at the same time can be quite chaotic, even though they all might have something very useful to say. A small group with a loving, effective leader who points to someone and says, your turn. Let's hear your piece. Let's hear your piece now. Can you respond to that? And manages an organized conversation between the different members, right? Goes beautifully, and everybody learns from each other. And so what I'm picturing as you talk is that we are all of the members. There's parts of us that have things to say, and there's got to be a leader. We talk a lot about this in the parts conversations. There's self has to kind of stand up and wrangle all this and not tell anybody they're unwelcome, but maybe tell everyone stop talking at the same time. All of your perspectives are valuable. Let's listen to you. Really terrified child, you talk right now, okay? Arrogant, overconfident, confident, dominant leader over here, and just manage it. It's don't judge it. Don't tell any of them they can't be there, but don't all talk at once. Recognize there's more than one part or thought process, and listen to them all. Slow down and listen.
You're really starting to understand this, and that's awesome, because this is a conversation that if we'd had a year and a half ago, this wouldn't be anywhere in the game. And this is something that gives me confidence in what we're doing, is because you're really starting to understand that as a system. And what you just said was so eloquently put in terms of now when we've got a group, there's got to be a group leader, and who is that? And that every part is welcome into the conversation, just not all at once. And to begin to have parts step back, and we'll be able to listen, and then have another part come in and have that conversation, and everybody has a role, or every part has had a role, and to not dismiss it, but to really welcome that thing that has been there, that has helped us get to this point, and then help it relax and know that there is a leader and somebody else is in charge, and that we can navigate this differently. Very well put.
Thank you. So at the end here, hopefully a little dose of therapeutic epiphany for somebody. How many of our listeners do you think, because Eric may have talked about this, how many of our listeners do you think are suffering because there's a part of them that they don't like? They wish it wasn't there, but they've kind of thought, they've given it more meaning than it deserves. Like, I am that, or because this part exists, here's why I'm so screwed up, or here's why I can't boom, whatever it is, right? When I listen to you talk and I listen to Eric talk, and you talk about the all parts are welcome, I just think that can bring the most amazing joy and peace and calmness to someone, to not hate their past. Like, the only reality that you've ever been allowed to have. You can't have the other realities that you wish existed, right? You just have the one life that actually happened. And any form of sort of fighting it or hating it's going to create anxiety and stress. But that piece there going, all right, like, I have a part of me that, when so-and-so, when this parent hit me, or when this person abused me, or when this spouse cheat, whatever it is, right? I have this part of me that just feels wounded and wants to lay in a fetal position and suck my thumb and cry mommy and not do anything, right? When you hate it or think that that's the only, that's all it controls, like, if that's controlling the home group,
right?
Yes, your life is kind of a disaster. But if you go, no, but I have a self here and can kind of take over. That's not who I am. That's something that happened to me. I just feel like that would be incredibly relieving and therapeutic for people to stop resisting the parts or being it and just look at it.
Well, your question is how many out there have this? And we've all got it. 100% is the answer to that question.
Nice.
And the other part to that is when self comes in, judgment goes out. And there's a part that's having a judgment on a part. And usually when we settle into, oh, this is this, and I'm here, and we can look at those parts from a place of internal compassion and what they went through and how they got there and the circumstance in it, the judgment settles out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the joy in this. I mean, in my own personal exploration of this model and how it's worked for me, that's been my experience. And it's taken so much of the story and set it aside and allowed me to really look at the world from a different place. And when I do that, every place in my life where there's been conflict has shifted because the internal piece has shifted. And this is a difficult complex that we're playing with, because we are in a place where somebody else is affecting our world. They are triggering something. They're doing something that is causing us to have to do something that we may not want to do, or to solve a problem that we don't want to solve, or go into a victim place where this isn't my fault. And again, you know, as we step into next week, the following one, we're going to start to explore some of how that works and how we can be in relationship with it different.
Perfect.
So this is really a great place to stop the first part of the trilogy.
Let the trilogy begin. Yes, we got the first part.
Play with these thoughts a little bit, and come back and listen to this a couple of times, and then we'll step in and we'll start to unblend.
Awesome.
Next couple of weeks.
Oh man, good job as usual. So let's wrap up part 1 here of the trilogy on stories, and we're going to come back next week with part 2, which is kind of the exploration, which I'm really interested to kind of see. It sounds very exciting. It sounds like an adventure, so I can't wait to see where you take us with that. But thanks for listening, everybody. This has been Charlie Jewett and Brooke Olson on the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast, and hope you're getting help, sharing with friends, and like Brooke said, listening over and over and over again. I don't know what the current research is, but I think in the past when I studied, you only remember about 20% of something you hear the first time. So I do a lot of repeat listening to things that are helpful for me. We'll see you guys next week.